Welcome to Work This Way, a labor and employment podcast. I'm Tina Emerson, joined here today by Bridget Blinn Spears. She's a labor and employment attorney in our Raleigh office. Good to see you, Bridget.
And joining us today from Duke University are Kim Hewitt, the Vice President for Institutional Equity and Chief Diversity Officer, as well as Antwan Lofton, the Vice President for Human Resources and Chief Human Resources Officer. So Kim and Antwan, thank you for taking time to talk to us today. We look forward to speaking with you both about investigations. First, can you start us off by just giving us a brief picture of your careers and what you do now in your roles at Duke?
It's so nice to be here. I have been at Duke for about 5 years, but before I came to Duke, I started out my career as a lawyer in private practice. So I started out at a kind of small insurance defense litigation firm, and then I had children and spent some time working in-house for a public school district. And that's really where I first started doing some investigation work. And then I went to a slightly larger law firm with a group that was focused on a school law practice, mostly working in the K-12 environment. And then, around 2008, when there was a lot of financial challenges for law firms, I started thinking about either working in like a in-house corporate practice, or I ended up taking a position with a small law school that was connected to a university. And that was my kind of first introduction to working in the higher ed environment. And I stayed there for kind of a short time, and then an opportunity at a bigger university came up, really overseeing the Equal Opportunity Office. And so that's really what led me to this position that I'm in at Duke. I had an interim position at another institution similar to Duke, and then I came here 5 years ago where I oversee this team that does investigation work, but also a team that does education and engagement around equity and inclusion, and really thinking about how those two teams work together to engage in some alternative resolution practices, some restorative justice practices to try to resolve problems that are more appropriately resolved in that manner versus going into this more formal investigation process. So that's my journey.
Well, I think it's a wonderful journey, and thank you both for having us with you today. So as mentioned, I'm Antwan Lofton, and it's a funny story how I came to be in human resources. So when I started my career, I was in healthcare. And when I say healthcare, we were working with individuals with developmental disabilities. And I was a program manager of that particular unit. But I discovered, and we said persons served, because you could not say patients at that time in history. I was discovering that the individuals that we were trying to teach independent life skills, they were not meeting the grade that we really needed them to meet. And I started to realize that we were hiring individuals that were not trained to actually teach these courses. So at that time, I went to the organization, and after probably my fifth or sixth time sharing my concern, he said, we're going to send you over to this place called personnel, and you're going to finish your internship over there. And that was over 25 years ago, and I've been in human resources ever since. So I've done healthcare, higher ed, private sector as well, but higher ed is really my passion. So I have now been at Duke for 8 years, and I've had the distinct pleasure of working alongside Kimberly Hewitt, partnering both human resources and OIE as well.
Well, it sounds like you've found your passion for sure to be there as long as you have, and that's great. Congratulations to you. Now, how did the Office for Institutional Equity and Human Resources work together to make Duke an equitable place for students and staff?
So in lots of ways, we do. So a lot more and more, we're finding that when problems emerge in an area at the university, they often involve maybe something related to discrimination and harassment, but I think more often than not, also some just kind of general HR culture issues. And so when we're addressing those, when complaints come to us, we often are, reaching out to someone in human resources to say, hey, we need to partner on this, or what do you know? What's the background on this situation? So in that formal kind of investigation lane, but also just on a whole host of issues that the institution faces. Antwan and I would be partnering together to think about how are we providing appropriate professional development, and how are we educating people about their hiring practices to make sure they're doing those, in a way that's compliant with the law. I don't know. We have a lot of interaction.
We do.
Lot of communication back and forth.
Absolutely. I agree. When you hear the name Duke University, people automatically think about healthcare and they think about educating students. Well, there's one thing that we have in common in both of those areas. It's the people. It's the people that make up the faculty and the staff that is providing educational opportunities for students. It's the people that are working within the hospital to provide patient care. So the humans are at the core of everything that we do. So it's been a wonderful partnership with Kim. There's a running joke that we have between the two of us as well as our offices. It's never a dull moment. They keep us on our toes, but I'm thankful for the partnership. And it's always great being connected with leaders that even when you are having to do an investigation or you're in crisis management, you're partnered or linked with people that continue to put people first, and you really enjoy working with them. So I'm very thankful for the partnership that we have.
So, and having worked with both of you, I know that you both keep in mind Duke's kind of overall goals, the overall culture and values that the institution is trying to live into. How do you see investigations fitting into or serving those goals and values?
That's a great question. So something Antwan said, I think, and you hear when people explain what it's like to be at a place, a lot of institutions might use the same language and you think, oh, that's just a cliche. But I think that one of the really true things about Duke is it's a very relational place. So when something pops up, it's the way that we're able to collaborate and we have relationships that we can come together to try to solve problems. And I think that really is indicative of how we do investigations and why we do them. I mean, of course, we understand our legal and compliance related obligations, but it's how we work through these problems together to try to come to a good outcome. And so I think I think it is a thing that distinguishes Duke. I've been at, I guess, 4 different institutions. And I think when I originally was introduced to Duke, that was a thread that I sort of noticed, and it's definitely become realized.
Just to piggyback off of what Kim said, number one, I 100% agree. But we allow those values to play a very huge part in how we render a decision. So when we're going through an investigation or we're finding out what that outcome is, we take that moment to pause, to reflect what is the mission, what are our core values, and we allow that to drive the decisions that we have to make for our institution and health system.
And those investigations are really meant to generate the best outcomes and the best decisions for the information that you're able to gather. What do you wish people knew about investigations?
Y'all can jump in there.
I know. This is a super easy one to answer.
Mine would be just because one individual files a complaint doesn't mean that it's going to be a quick turnaround as it relates to rendering a decision. One complainant could equal anywhere from 25 to 35 people that you have to interview as well. So the timeline sometimes kind of grows, but just making sure that people understand it doesn't always happen right overnight. Kim?
No, I think that how to help people understand the complexity and the time it takes to do investigations is so hard. And there are elements that we can't discuss. And that'll be, for example, sometimes a sticky legal issue might emerge. And we are independent of legal, and we're not, defending Duke. We render a neutral, independent decision, but there are times when we need legal advice. And that can be complicated. It can take time, but you can't say that to the parties because, it's just, it wouldn't be appropriate. We also want to make sure people understand that those lines are not blurred. And so I think helping people to understand that it is better for everybody if we follow the steps in a thorough manner. And, I don't know, sometimes I don't know if people imagine that we're just like sitting around eating bonbons, but and I understand the frustration, because when you are involved and it's your position, your relationships with your colleagues, it's really difficult to be in that space. The other thing I will say is that the processes are more complex because of guidelines that we get from the federal government. And and those are constantly shifting for people. And so I think, that's also just kind of an unknown that people don't understand as much. And it's hard to communicate that to people. So I think that the timing piece and why it takes the time that it does is the hardest thing, and the thing that's, I think, the greatest area of misconception around the process.
So you mentioned, Kim, this is a nice segue to the next question that we have, the sort of the shifting government regulations, particularly in the space of harassment, discrimination, Title IX for universities, and having to adjust for those things. In a kind of bigger picture sense, can you talk to us about how your approach to investigations or your view of investigations has changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, so for one thing, I was thinking about this. The complexity and the length of reports has shifted over time. So, years ago when I started this process, it was a much more streamlined kind of report we did at the end. And as the requirements around it built, they're much more complicated now. It's a bit of a struggle, because I'm always saying to my team, you want to write that in a way that it's easily understandable. It shouldn't take someone 2 hours with a highlighter to get through the report. And you have to articulate the elements of each complaint issue. So that the complexity, and then some little practical things. Like, there was a time when I was totally opposed to transcripts, that I felt like it made it seem like a deposition. It was going to chill participation in the process. And now this is just standard. So those are the kinds of things that have, and the more overlapping. So not just with human resources. Sometimes there might be HR issues, there might be protected status issues, and then there might be research misconduct. And there could be an allegation about misappropriation of financial material. So that there's more and more of those layers within one investigation.
Well said, Kim.
Well, Antwan, you were talking earlier about the trajectory of your career. Do you have any advice for a new professional who is facing that first complaint that might require investigation?
Sure. The first thing is, do not be quick to form an answer as it relates to what you think has happened without doing the actual investigation. Because when doing so, you become biased and you're making a decision not based on facts. So trust the process, interview everyone without inserting what you think the outcome is. Take your time and go through the entire process.
Any thoughts there, Kim?
Well, I do have a thought there. And I also one more thing I wanted to say about the investigation process, which I'm finding over time, as it becomes more complex, as there are more requirements, it's also, to me, not set up for someone who is acting in bad faith. I think that the systems, and I don't know what the answer for this is, but it is possible, I think, to take advantage of the systems in a way that still requires us to respond. And that's also hard to explain to the community. So I think, we'll see where that leads, but I think that's a difficulty. And that might be something I would say to someone new, right? Like, how do you stay objective and neutral, recognizing that beneath the surface, you might think this person is weaponizing this process and I still have to follow it, right? And so, like, how do you do that at the same time as you communicate with individuals? When you're doing investigations, you're kind of in relationship with someone. And so you have to be really thoughtful about how you manage some of these stressors on the system.
And I have a question for you, Bridget, actually, since we're sitting here with legal counsel. When you are navigating this with a client, tell me about your role when the attorney is brought into this investigation to make sure that it's done properly.
So there's a few things that we have to think about. And one is, are we being brought in as an attorney? So sometimes we're being brought in to sit in the seat of legal counsel. And sometimes we're brought in to sit in the seat of a human resources investigator or an investigator from Kim's office or the equivalent office at a different institution. And so we need to be clear on, are we doing a privileged investigation where we're going to try to protect that attorney-client privilege and expect to have work product? We need to have the roles be very clear, because if it's not a privileged investigation, or if there's a chance that the privilege might be held and then waived, we just want to know that from the beginning and be thoughtful about how we're proceeding. And I think in any case, one of the real values in bringing in an outside person is a layer of objectivity. And people are sometimes willing to be more open and trust the process a little more when, when there's an additional layer of just a disconnect between the institution that's doing the investigation and the actual investigator. And so when I'm in that role, I'm able to help ascertain whether behavior fits within policies, fits within the values of the institution that I'm investigating on behalf of. And also to talk to that person as an outside person, and hear their perspectives, I think sometimes with what feels like fresh ears, not only to me, but also to the people who I'm interviewing.
Mm-hmm. And it's always great to hear that interaction between inside counsel and outside counsel. Do you agree with that assessment, Kim?
Yes, definitely. I mean, when we're thinking about whether or not it's a case we want to send to outside counsel, we're thinking maybe it involves more senior people, so we need that extra layer of objectivity.
Right. Thank you. Well, investigations are obviously very sensitive, and the two of you are navigating a very nuanced area of human resources. So thank you for sharing your insight today, and particularly in the area of higher education. So thank you both for joining us today. And we will see you next time on Work This Way.